Hey everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to the newest episode of The Pulse. I'm standing here with Camille Campbell. How you doing, Camille?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
I am so good. Can you
Good.
start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. So, like you said, my name is Camille, and I am a pharmacist by profession, but I have worked in pharmaceutical industry, so like in the clinical research space for a really long time as a medical science liaison, as a medical director, and as someone who is responsible for like helping to communicate clinical trial results to patients and providers and pharmacists and healthcare providers who are responsible for like administering drugs to patients. I did that for a long time. I've realized that a lot of times our communities, Black folks, were not represented in the clinical research, even though in the real world, we're often prescribed these drugs. And as a pharmacist, I know that there might be differences that can impact how drugs like work in the body based on your genetics and your ancestry and your biology. So I actually left pharmaceutical industry for a little while and went into the health equity space really fully to do community engagement work and to educate about clinical trials to our communities and serve as a bridge between like companies and our communities and to empower our people to feel comfortable about clinical trials and asking about participation. And now I'm back in pharma. So that's what I do though. It's all like health equity, clinical trial diversity work.
Yes, and we have a good resume for that. We have a good resume.
Was that enough? I'm sorry.
And I love seeing women in clinical trials or doing work with clinical trials because there's so many questions in our community about clinical trials. There's so many concerns, and I don't want to talk about the history. I think we've gone over the history enough. So can we talk about why it is so important for Black people to be in clinical trials?
Sure. Well, like I said, a lot of times, especially in this day and age, we have the ability to create drugs that are very precise, right? It's called precision medicine. So you're making drugs that are maybe specific for a certain genetic alteration or something specific to someone's biology. But if people with different ancestries and different biologies and different genetics aren't included in the studies, then how do you know if those drugs that are being created to target those specific like aspects of disease are going to work in those people? And so as Black people are, again, as a human race, I like to say we are more alike than we are different. But those little tiny differences can impact a lot of things, like the way we process, metabolize, all the like drugs and stuff. And so if we're not included, then when the drugs get like approved by the FDA and they're being used in the real world, what if it doesn't work in you? Because you were not included in the study and people who come from your same background were included in the studies. So that's why it's important for us to be involved so we can make sure that the drugs that pharmaceutical companies are developing, they actually work in the diverse real world population that they're going to be used in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even just hearing like some of our audience talk about their concerns around clinical trials, if you could give them one piece of advice about why they should not be concerned, like there's nothing to worry about. Is it as good as a real drug, or are they going to get a placebo and we're going to find out?
You're reading my mind. Okay, let's talk about placebos. So I will say, if you have concerns, they're valid, number one, and you should talk to a doctor who validates your concerns.
Absolutely.
And feel empowered, please, to ask as many questions as you want and get as many answers as you need to make you feel comfortable in determining on whether or not to participate, right? Participate or not. You might still choose not to do it, but I'm all about like making informed decisions. Please make your decision based on facts and not fiction. So find somebody you trust and ask those questions. The whole placebo thing, a common misconception, right? So a lot of people think, well, if I get involved in a clinical trial, I'm either going to get like the study drug, the active drug that they're looking at, or I'm going to get the placebo, which is a sugar pill that has nothing in it, and my disease is not going to be treated. That actually, in most cases, is not accurate, right?
Really?
It is unethical in this day and age for you not to at least receive the standard of care when you're in a clinical trial, meaning whatever is currently being used regularly every day to treat that disease. So when you're in a clinical trial, you usually are either going to be, if you're just looking at the basics, receiving the standard of care, which you probably would have gotten anyway if you weren't in the study and you were just being treated by your doctor, or you're going to get the study drug. The only time you for real would get like a placebo that has nothing in it is if there wasn't a standard of care already in existence. So that is a common misconception that people have. And they're like, well, I don't want to get the sugar pill. It ain't going to treat my disease. And it's just like, no,
you're not going to get that.
At the very least, you're going to get what you would have gotten if you were not in the study and you were just being treated. So
absolutely. And can you also touch on the fact that, or maybe not even fact, but let me just get your perspective on clinical trials as a form of treatment, right? You already want to say, I won't even finish the question. Go ahead and say what you were going to say.
Yeah, I mean, clinical trials as an option for care.
Okay.
Absolutely. So again, when you're in your physician's office and they are starting to, maybe tell you about your diagnosis and say, well, these are the different medicines that I am thinking about prescribing to you as a patient. I want us to feel empowered to say, well, is there a clinical trial available for that? Because it should be part of your options as well. A lot of times, especially if you're involved in a clinical trial early on in your diagnosis, like you might get cutting edge care before anybody else that could save your life versus if you waited to ask about a clinical trial or your doctor offered it at the very end of your diagnosis or later on, right? And so right up front, when the doctor is talking about lifestyle changes, medicines that they might be prescribing, if you want to participate in a clinical trial, if they're not also offering that, I want you to be empowered to ask yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I know that also in terms of clinical trials, sometimes there can be a challenge or a challenge for people to participate based on location, based on access. So what are some of the ways that we can kind of reduce some of those challenges? I know that's kind of like not a hard question, but a big question.
It's a big problem. And it is something that a lot of research sponsors like pharmaceutical companies are trying to address. That's one of the things that I've focused on in my work, whether it was in pharma or whether it was with the community engagement health equity company that I've worked at, is how do we bring trials closer to the people? So, from an industry perspective, we're looking at having clinical trial sites that are closer to the community, right? So instead of having all these clinical trials, these big academic medical centers, which are sometimes hard to get to if you live in a rural area or in a suburban area, can there be a clinical trial site that's closer to the community that maybe has a connection with that academic institution, so that way there's still some guidance, but the trial is there with the people? Or maybe having mobilized health units that go from community to community that allow people to participate in that way. So we're trying to figure out as an industry how to bring research closer to people, because there are a lot of people who want to be involved, but then they're like, I'm not driving all the way downtown, or I'm not
over and over
parking, or I ain't got my work schedule doesn't allow me to participate. And we want to try to remove those barriers for people. So know that we're working on it. But again, if you're interested as a patient, you should ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Speak up. You got to start speaking up a little bit more. Yeah. And so the other thing I want to ask you, because I know that you are focused heavily in health equity. And I know with everything going on, I know politically climates are a bit tense. Is health equity still on the table? I know there was a list of words that were banned, and equity was one of them. So is health equity still a focus? Is that something that we should be concerned about losing?
I have a lot of thoughts on this.
I want to hear those thoughts.
From government political perspective, there's a lot of opposition to anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what I will say is that those of us who have always done the work, we are still doing the work, and we're doing it in our places of influence, whether that is, again, at a community engagement organization, whether it's at a pharmaceutical company. We've realized, especially when it comes to the science of it all, and also it can be a business imperative too, right? That it's important. It's important to make sure that everybody is included in the process, in the research process, that everybody has access to medications, no matter what your background, your race, ethnicity, where you live. It's the moral thing to do. It's the right thing to do. So even though there's a lot of outside noise, and we know what that looks like and what that feels like and what we're hearing, just know that there are so many people who are on the inside of these different organizations and institutions who are still doing the work, who care about our communities. Because guess what? Just because it's a list of banned words does not make the health disparities go away. They still exist. People still have problems. People still can't get their medicine. So the problems are still there, and we're still trying to solve all the problems.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your perspective today. And I do want to ask you one last question.
Sure.
If there was anything or one exact thing that you really wanted people to remember from this interview or take with them from this interview, what would it be? It could be something we already touched on, or it could be something different.
I would say I'm really passionate about people being informed with facts, real facts from people that you trust. So when you're making a healthcare decision, try to find information that is accurate. It may take you talking to a couple of different people. Talk to healthcare providers who are knowledgeable in that space. Get facts. Maybe talk to patients who have had a lived experience, but be careful about where you're getting your information from, and make sure that you're kind of putting different pieces of the puzzle together so that you can have enough information to make a decision that is going to be impactful for you, but that is based on facts and not fiction and myths and sometimes
misinformation. Absolutely.
misinformation.
And no more getting your information from social media unless it's from me or blackdoctor.org or her LinkedIn profile. Well, again, I want to thank you.
Make sure your influencers are, again, trusted and knowledgeable and know what they're talking about and experienced in whatever area they're discussing.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Pulse. You were amazing. You shared so much great information. So thank you so much.
This was great.